So thank you, everyone. So this session is without a moderator, but I'm just introducing the session and the two speakers, and then they'll have the complete floor to explain and guide you through their session. So today we're here to speak about operationalizing climate security in UNMISS operation, and they will share with us experience from a specific mission, which is the UN mission in South Sudan. So to my left, Lucas, as climate, peace and security expert for NORCAP and deployed at the UNMISS mission, and then Miriam Sorri, who is project manager at NORCAP, focusing on UN reforms and peace missions. So the floor is yours, guys.
Thank you very much for the introductions and welcome everyone. My fears of an empty room have been not come to it's not true, so that's great. I just wanted to start by saying that we will be self-moderating this session, which is great. We like that. Lucas, my good Belgian colleague, has been deployed to the UNMISS mission since December last year, together with a second advisor, Ratcha Tekenet of Kenya. She has a more programmatic focus, whereas Lucas focuses on data and analysis. And the reason why I bring up nationalities is to underline that NORCAP is a global provider of expertise. Some of you may not know NORCAP. We're part of the Norwegian Refugee Council, while our mothership, the NRC, has a humanitarian mandate and run their own country operations and programs in displacement settings. NORCAP works with partners across humanitarian, development, and peace-building domains. And our goal is to improve aid to better protect people affected by crisis and climate change. And we do this by working in two complementary ways to improve aid. We provide targeted expertise, such as a climate, peace, and security expert to the UN mission in South Sudan in order to strengthen our partners' operational response, but we also collaborate with partners to develop solutions to unmet gaps and challenges. And we can talk more about that later. Our reason why we're here today is NORCAP's nascent interest and engagement with the climate, peace, and security agenda. First, Lucas will speak on his concrete experience from South Sudan, and I will later describe more fully how NORCAP works to support UN peace operations across several thematics and what our current initiatives and future plans are, and then we look forward to your questions and feedback. Thank you. Lucas, over to you.
Thank you very much, Miriam. Good afternoon, everyone, and really great to be here. I used to be with Adelphi until the end of last year, also being involved in this conference, and so it's very nice to be back here as a panelist now and part of the UN mission in South Sudan. So for today's session, we will go through a quick presentation, after which we will have a discussion and also like a more interactive moment within the room. So we wanted to kick off with a bit of a more traditional kind of a presentation, just because there's a lot of examples, a lot of things that I'd like to share from the UN mission in South Sudan, and presentation also helps to keep it a bit in a storyline flow. So, so the presentation for, there's only one screen in the room. So I'll first kick off by just explaining a little bit the context in South Sudan. What are the climate change effects and the different impacts felt in South Sudan? How is this the peace and security, is this affecting peace and security in the country? And then how climate, peace and security is also covered in the UNMISS mandates. And then finally, how we are actually operationalizing it in South Sudan. So first and foremost, the effects of climate change in South Sudan are very similar as the other countries in the East African region and across the world. There is a strong increase in air temperature in the past years and decades, together with a decrease in precipitation. And a third element that is also very important is that there's a change happening also in the distribution of this rainfall, meaning that rainfall has become more erratic, that seasons have become much more unpredictable, and so on. So these are the usual suspects that climate change affects occurring in this part of the world. So when we look at these climate change effects occurring in South Sudan, you can say that it exacerbates some of the existing natural hazards that South Sudan has been facing for many, many decades and historically. So first and foremost, it is felt through flooding. So South Sudan is in the Nile Delta, and so the Nile River is flowing through South Sudan. So it has always experienced seasonal flooding, which has become much worse because of the effects of climate change. So especially since 2019 to 2020, there have been severe flooding across many parts of South Sudan, with seasonal waters no longer receding, which means that whole parts of the country are completely underwater. So another element that is seen in South Sudan is the effects of drought, especially in the northeast and the southeast of the country is very prone to droughts. And these have also become more severe because of the effects of climate change. Then, as I mentioned earlier, there is this seasonal unpredictability, which is affecting many different sectors in South Sudan. Of course, many people depend on agriculture. Pastoralism is also a very important economic sector of the country. So these are all very much affected by this seasonal unpredictability and erratic rainfall. And then, of course, South Sudan, it's a very hot country, but temperatures have been increasing a lot. There have been a lot of heat waves in the past years. For example, this year in April, the government decided also to close some of the schools and to see some of restrict some of the public activities because of another heat wave. So this is also very much affecting the country and its population. So just a map developed by OCHA from this year that I wanted to share, just to give you an idea of the extent of flooding in South Sudan. So this is based on satellite imagery from the past years, looking at the flood extent and how much of the country is actually affected by this flooding. And so, as you can see, it's quite severe. It's in many regions that are trying to cope with floodwaters. And as I mentioned, this is no longer a seasonal issue. It is really something that is the year-on staying. So let's move to the next slide. So just to give an example of how this is affecting some of the communities in South Sudan. So this is one of the IDP camps that is being protected by the mission in South Sudan. And it's been, since 2020, completely flooded around the camp. So people are no longer able to leave the camp and return to their homes. Even though they were displaced by conflict, they have no way to return because of the flooding. This, of course, also brings a lot of logistical challenges with it in terms of the humanitarian response and just protection of civilians, basically, because dike management is a huge challenge when the water levels are rising. So this is also a bit of a new area where the peacekeeping mission is also trying to work on, and I'll explain a bit more about this later. So South Sudan is also a context, I think, within the region, but also globally, where you can really see the effects of climate change directly affecting the peace and security landscape as well. So as I mentioned, the natural hazards have certain impacts on important sectors in the country, like livestock and agriculture, and also access to markets and so on. So it directly affects the socioeconomic situation of people. And then on how it affects security is maybe most visible in human mobility. Of course, many people are being displaced because of, for example, flooding, but there is also slower onset kind of changes in human mobility, especially when it comes to cattle movements and seasonal cattle migration. So because so many regions have become no longer accessible, or there is a really scarcity in natural resources like water or pasture lands, the last years have really seen a shift in migration patterns of cattle herders and really moving into areas that they traditionally would not move into when they adapt to changing seasons or climate shocks. And this has then also led to increased competition over some of the existing natural resources. There's a lot of historical grievances in South Sudan also between different ethnic groups, between different tribes, and this also translates in these changes in movements as well. And so when certain groups move into other areas, especially across administrative borders of South Sudan, it can quickly rise tensions into conflicts as well. So there has been, in the past years, also a lot of communal conflicts that are directly related to climate shocks as well. So maybe just a few words about the UN mission in South Sudan. At the moment, it's the largest peace operation active in the world. There's about 18,000 personnel deployed in the mission, 3,500 troops and military personnel, 1,500 police personnel, and about 2,500 civilians in the mission. So the mission was established right after the independence of South Sudan in 2011. And the main mandated tasks of the mission are, of course, protection of civilians, also creating conditions conducive to delivery of humanitarian assistance, also supporting the implementation of the peace process, and then also monitoring and investigating and reporting on violations of humanitarian and human rights. So when we look at the UNMISS climate, peace and security mandates, it's a quite new addition to the mission's mandates in 2021. The first language on climate security was introduced in the preamble of the mission mandate, but also in the operational language. So as you can see, this is basically an extraction of all the language related to climate security in the mandate. It's not that much, it's quite vague. It's very much focused on understanding the risks and making risk assessments focusing on climate security. But then also there's an important part on how climate shocks are affecting the implementation of the UNMISS mandate. So the vagueness of this language is also kind of helpful for the mission to see how you then implement climate, peace and security into the mission. Yeah. So let's quickly, the first language on climate security in the UNMISS mandate came in 2021, and this was followed by the deployment of the first climate security advisor for the mission in 2022. So the senior climate and security advisor is still deployed in the mission. He's been in the mission for 2 years now. And he's also, as you can see on the slides in the organogram, he's also having a double-headed function. So he's deployed in UNMISS through the climate security mechanism and UNDP. So he is both part of UNDP in South Sudan, but also the UN mission in South Sudan, and specifically under the political pillar. So since we can go back to the slide. So since his deployment, he also received several staff, of which myself and my colleague Ratia both deployed through NORCAP since about a year, almost a year. And then we also have a colleague who is based within UNDP, who is a national climate change specialist in UNDP. So me and Ratia, we are part of what we call the Climate, Peace and Security Unit under the Climate and Security Advisor. And we are part of the Civil Affairs Division within UNMISS. And we all spoke, we heard earlier about my director, Hiroko, during the previous session. And this is part of the political pillar in the mission under the DSRSG political. I wanted to talk a bit about what are the different climate security activities that we are doing in UNMISS. And I try to divide it into 4 different types of broad activities. The first one, as I mentioned earlier, with the increase in flooding and climate shocks in South Sudan, the mission is basically one of the largest service providers in the country. It has the most extended logistical network in the country as well. So inevitably, with climate shocks increasing, UNMISS also became much more involved in disaster risk response and management, especially on the logistical side, but also engineering, dike management, and so on. So this is something that our mission support division is very much involved in, together with the force. They are the ones in the mission doing most of the work, focusing on engineering and dikes and on the flood response. Another part that is important, of course, for the mission is, as with all UN peace operations, trying to make them more environmentally sustainable and more adaptable to changing climates. So the role of greening the mission operations and plannings is something that sits very much within the environmental affairs unit within the mission, which is also part of mission support. So I'm mentioning those 2 points because I want to say that this is not exactly what we do in the mission. This is not our team's role. We look more at number 3 and number 4 on these slides, which is first and foremost trying to get a better understanding of what are the linkages between climate impacts and peace and security. And then secondly, trying to develop responses that can actually address peace and security risks that emerge from climate shocks. So more on the peace building side, what can the mission do better in terms of peace building efforts? So when you look specifically to our unit in the mission, our activities could also be categorized under, we do a lot of training and capacity building and awareness raising around climate security. Another important element of our work is reporting and analysis, and then also mainstreaming climate security into some of the existing programmatic activities in the mission, especially within the Civil Affairs Division, as we are part of the Civil Affairs Division as well. And then, of course, also support to the government of South Sudan on everything related to climate security. So on the next slides, I try to list a couple of examples of how we do each of these different activities. So first, on the capacity building side, we do quite a lot of workshops and trainings that we try to do in South Sudan. So this can be focused internally within the mission or within the UN country team, but also externally working together with different government agencies, development partners, NGOs, civil society, academia, and so on. So this is really also trying to build a bit of a community of practice in South Sudan around climate security within the UN system, but also outside of the UN system. For example, this year in April, we worked together with the CSM and the UN System Staff College on rolling out quite a generic training on climate security. These are the photos, by the way, of that training. But we also try to do more specific trainings. We're starting one in 2 weeks on climate security and gender, really looking at what are some of the gender-related elements with climate security in South Sudan. We also did one on integrated analysis on climate security. This was very much focused within the UN country team, just to have a better understanding who is actually doing what on data analysis related to climate security. And this was really helpful then also to have a better understanding what kind of data can be shared between different agencies and so on. Another interesting training, I think, is something that we will be doing in the next weeks together with the UN police. So we are working with them together on a training of trainers, different training of trainers actually, that will be rolled out during several weeks, where we try to train UN police officers on climate security, but also it's also a bit of a workshop format to kind of work together with the UN pol, that they can actually also find out for themselves how they can better mainstream climate security within their activities, because they have, for example, an anti-cattle raiding unit within the UN police. They have a whole bunch of activities focusing on communal policing. So these are all things that are so closely related to climate security, but for the moment it's not really a focus area that they already incorporate in those activities. Then under training, capacity building, awareness raising, we also have the UN Climate, Peace and Security Working Group that is active in South Sudan. We try to meet on a monthly basis, and it's also just the idea of sharing information and strengthening this community of practice in South Sudan. And then also an important element also of our awareness raising specifically in South Sudan is the different media engagements that we do. UNMISS has the largest radio network in the country. So we are also invited from time to time to talk about climate security, to really share this with the audience of the missions radio. Then another really important part of our work is everything related to reporting and analysis. So given that we have climate security covered in the UNMISS mandate, we also have 150 words that we need to report on in the quarterly Secretary General reports. So this is something that is also an important update that we can send to UN headquarters on climate security. Apart from that, we try to develop many different kind of analytical products, but also specific briefings that can be requested by the mission leadership. For example, we developed a climate security hotspots mapping based on historical conflicts in the past years and linking this with some of the climate impacts that we've seen in South Sudan to better understand what are like really the specific regions in South Sudan that are most vulnerable for climate related security risks. This year, there has been a high risk of flooding again in South Sudan. There was a national flood preparedness and response task force that was set up. Within that task force, the role of UNMISS and our unit was specifically on providing conflict analysis related to the flooding. So we also developed a paper linking the flood risks with conflict analysis and trying to understand where the flooding will be most severe and where it will then affect the security situation as well. So we do a lot of maps and visualizations. So we work closely together with the GIS team in the mission as well. And yeah, let me see. What is also really important on the reporting side of our work is trying to work closely together with the Public Information Office of the mission. So we have a whole strategic communications department in the mission that is working on radio, but also written press and video. And so with every activity that we are doing in the fields, and I'll explain a bit more about that later, we try to invite them also to make sure that we have these media-style reports also to cover some of the activities that the mission is doing, because it really helps us also then to spread and raise more awareness about climate risks. So another part of our work that we did with the National Flood Management Task Force was developing some of the key messages that were part of the flood preparedness, but also the conflict prevention of the floods. So the national government developed key messages that they shared with the communities, either through radio, but also through phone, through word to mouth as well. And so the development of these key messages was done by the Flood Management Task Force, to which UNMISS and the broader UN country team is also part, together with the government. And we really try to make sure also to integrate some conflict-related messaging in there and trying to directly make sure that communities are aware of some of the conflicts risks that are emerging and calling for more solidarity between communities to host people displaced by flooding and so on. So this kind of messaging is also something that we are closely involved in. Then maybe one interesting study also to mention is we are, me and my colleague Ratia in the mission, we are part of NORCAP. We are deployed to the mission through NORCAP. So we are also working together with NORCAP and NUPI at the moment to develop a study on specifically looking at the role of UNMISS in addressing climate, peace and security in South Sudan to really capture some of the lessons learned based on our experience. So this is something that we hope to finalize maybe by somewhere next year. Just an example of some of the analysis that we are doing. So this is one of the heat maps that we developed in collaboration with the GIS team in UNMISS, but also with the JMAC, the Joint Mission Analysis Center. So JMAC is really good in trying to map different security incidents across the country based on the data that they gather. Then we overlaid this basically together with the flood extent in the country to try to understand how flooding is also affecting some of the security dynamics. And this is, of course, something that we try to understand qualitatively by reading the reports that come from the field, but also looking at this in a map. There are some dynamics that we can grasp from this. And as you can see, the flood extent is quite severe in Unity State, in the center of the country. And you can see that security incidents often occur at the peripheries of the flooding, which also makes sense because many communities move out from the flooded areas across, and usually across state borders. And this is then where sensitivities really come at play, and security risks and incidents occur. So this is something that we really try to capture by developing these kind of maps, and it's also really helpful then to present this to the mission leadership for decision making. Another important project that we've been working on in the past months for the 2024 flooding season, we started to work on a flood management dashboards, basically trying to capture different floods early warnings related to the flooding that we can capture from the daily reports that we are reading through. And so we try to identify 3 different types of early warnings or alerts. One is when flooding is about to occur or is it started to occur. We try to report on it. Another one is when displacement because of flooding has started. And then another one is when there is clear security risks emerging from flooding or related displacements. And especially the one on the security risks is then really important to capture also quantitatively, because, for example, we've seen for a number of days or weeks that very small reports coming from the field are actually early warnings for emerging conflict risks. And through this dashboard, we try to really capture this and then also see what the mission could do to prevent conflicts occurring because of the flooding. Another part of this dashboard is then to try to track the different activities that the mission has been doing. And this is specific to the Civil Affairs Division. So the Civil Affairs is doing a lot of community engagement, peace dialogues, and these kind of things. So through these dashboards, we really try to capture the different activities from Civil Affairs related to the flooding, which is also useful as a monitoring tool, but also maybe in a few weeks after the flooding season is past, to look back and to see, okay, what has actually been done, and so on. Another important part of this flood management dashboards, and these maps are actually capturing this as well, was our efforts to map different high grounds in South Sudan. So all the different states in South Sudan that are flood prone all have different high ground areas where people tend to migrate to and also congregate. And some of these high grounds are really safe areas for people, especially when they move with their cattle, to move into. But others are very sensitive and quite prone to conflicts as well. So what we tried to do in the past months was work together with our civil affairs colleagues in the field to map all the different high grounds for each state. And they are now reflected on these different maps. And then to also track what is really happening in these different high grounds. And so we also work together with JMAC and with the different colleagues in the field to also make a security assessment for each of these high ground areas to see, okay, which of the high grounds are we expecting a lot of people to migrate to, but also where are some of the most severe security risks related to these high grounds. And these maps were then also used to develop some mission responses to prevent conflicts. So then we go more on the response side, I think, this is mostly focused on the activities of civil affairs in the mission. So, for example, for this flooding season, we have been closely involved in developing some flood sensitization and conflict prevention campaigns, really trying to bring in language around conflict prevention within some of the flood sensitization efforts that the mission has been doing on the ground. So the mission has a really extensive reach in South Sudan, in very remote places where no one else can actually go. So we try to do this flood sensitization through radio, of course, but also in person, really going on a patrol in those areas, bringing together people and really delivering the key messages that are important to prepare people for flooding, but also to prepare people for maybe other communities moving in their areas and preventing some of these conflicts. So these campaigns have been rolled out in many areas of South Sudan, and that's something we've been involved in as well. And then a very important element of our work is integrating then a climate security lens into some of the existing peace dialogues in South Sudan, but also trying to look for new peace initiatives directly linked to climate security. And for example, the UNMISS Civil Affairs Division has been doing seasonal cattle migration peace conferences for many years. So in many parts of South Sudan, you have seasonal cattle migration, either coming from Sudan into South Sudan or within South Sudan. And so these seasonal peace conferences really help to bring in the people that will migrate into those areas together with the host communities. And this is really then a platform that is provided for them to better manage some of the issues related to cattle moving in. This can be very specific on like rules around grazing lands, access, and so on. But it can also be focusing on, for example, environmental protection, making sure that cattle is not destroying farmlands and so on. So what we've been doing is trying to bring in climate security lens into these peace dialogues, into the seasonal cattle migration peace dialogues, really introducing a whole session focusing on what are the effects of climate change, what is expected in the future, and really also providing a way for people to voice some of their concerns and some of the issues that they experience, but also discuss some of the solutions that they maybe want to propose. We did a lot of other types of dialogues, especially now during the flooding season, with flood-affected populations, bringing together host communities with displaced communities, and trying to discuss ways to better manage how flood is affecting them. This is something that I think we've done. I think it was one of the first times that it was actually done in early September between different states. So there's always a big sensitivity in South Sudan when people move from one state to another state. There's a lot of sensitivities around these cross-border movements. And so in early September, we developed the first of its kind interstate peace dialogue focusing on the flooding. And this was also with the governor and county commissioners involved, with important community leaders also backing these kind of initiatives. So, and it also resulted then in peace agreements that also specifically specifically included resolutions related to the flooding, for example, allowing people access to certain areas when they were affected by flooding and so on. We're doing the same type of dialogues focusing specifically on land disputes. This is something that we've been rolling out with FAO recently in the past weeks. We've just concluded the second one, I think last week. So this is also something like a thematic area, very specific on land disputes, but that also that easily links with climate security as well. And then we try to do also a lot of support to the government. Of course, when we roll out these peace dialogues and so on at the state level, it's always in close cooperation with the local authorities and the state authorities. But also at the national level, we try to make sure that some of the existing strategies, frameworks, and so on that are developed, that they include climate security language as well. And then I also mentioned that we work closely involved in the national flood management task force as well. So I think I'll stop here.
Great, thank you, Lucas. It's really great to hear the really concrete and detailed work that you do. I just wanted to wrap up by asking you, what are some of the key challenges and gaps when it comes to implementing climate, peace and security in UN peace operations, as you know them on a general level, and with UNMISS in particular?
So in terms of challenges, I think there are the usual suspects. There's always a lack of funding, and especially this year also there's austerity measures in the mission. So there is very little dedicated climate security funding available in the mission. So this is something that we always look for to find also externally. There is also, of course, climate security. It's very early days in terms of mainstreaming in such a large mission. So there is, of course, a lack of knowledge, but also a lack of capacity within the mission to actually work on this issue. So many of the sections have no persons that have experience in climate security. There's no focal points in different sections to work with. So this is basically all something to just start with. I think there is also a lot of our work is also focusing on changing some of the mindsets and looking at this in a very different way, and that also takes time. So it already takes time just for people to know us within the mission, to understand what we're trying to do, then making them think about it differently when they are thinking about implementing their work and so on. It takes quite a lot of time. I think a particular challenge for us is also working more closely together with the uniformed personnel in the mission, the UN police, but also the military. I'm very glad that we can do this training of trainers soon with the UN police, because that will be like one of our first real collaborations together with them. And similarly with the force, we still need to strengthen much more our working relationship with them. And then I think maybe one more point is that peacekeeping is it's very short term. The mandate is only renewed yearly, so the mission is not really the type of entity that will do programmatic activities on a longer term. I mean, they're also just not the type of organization that is doing this work. While climate security, especially when you look at it from more like resilience building and so on, it's always a long-term effort. So trying to bridge the short-term needs in a peacekeeping environment, and also the short-term mindset that you have within the mission with longer-term goals is definitely also something of a challenge.
Thank you. And what are some of the needs and maybe opportunities to more effectively mainstream climate, peace and security and UN peace operations as you see it?
I think the examples that I gave on the peace dialogues, the community engagements at the very local level, I think that's a really great starting point for a peacekeeping mission to integrate a climate security lens. You can also feel during engagements with communities or during these dialogues that people just really understand these risks very much in South Sudan. The knowledge, of course, they have been coping with these kind of challenges for many generations, but it's becoming worse and worse. But people know this very well, but also really love to share this, and they really love to talk about this topic. And it also then offers a really great entry point to bring communities that are in conflict with each other to talk about something that they have kind of in common. So so the idea of facing a shared challenge, I think, is definitely a great opportunity for further dialogue and for further bringing communities together. Yeah, as I mentioned, I think a lot more, in terms of opportunities, a lot more can be done for us to work with the force and UNPOL, but also with the UN country team, really trying to bring in the UN country team and other implementing partners as well in some of the activities that the mission is doing. And this also would help in linking the short term with the longer term as well, because if you do a peace dialogue that is lasting just a few days, it would be great if you can then follow up with some resilience building project or some activities that actually can then change lives on the longer term. And that's something that is definitely something that can be strengthened in the future, but it's also a really great opportunity for the mission to facilitate this kind of work and really bring in some of the more also technical organizations like FAO or IOM and really link some of the, for example, climate smart agriculture that FAO is doing and really linking it with the peace building work that the mission is doing. Yeah, I think I'll stop there.
great. You have a room full of people who live and breathe climate, peace and security, and UN peace operations. So I will open the floor to the audience.
Okay. Thank you. Hi, I'm Andrew Hyde with the Stimson Center. I'm curious, actually, Lucas, your last, I think you had to cut short your presentation slightly, and the last slide I thought was something that interested me, which is the limits and opportunities of your dialogue with the government on this issue. Thanks.
So limits and opportunities in our engagement with the government. I think in my experience, and of course I'm quite new to South Sudan, this is maybe something that Hiroko can talk better about, but in my experience, working together at the state level, at the very local level, has been really fruitful, working with the government, especially during those peace dialogues. They're always a really vital part of these dialogues, because they also the ones that really can convene different communities together. So I think that's really vital, and that's been quite effective collaboration. I think then when it comes to following up and looking more at the national level, it also becomes maybe more challenging as well. So.
Chris.
Just excuse me, for every person asking question, please make sure you put on the mic for people on stream. Thank you.
Hi. So, Chris Huller from the mission in Somalia. Thanks for the presentation. So basically, I think I had several questions, obviously, but the main one was around, it would be really good to see, and I think one of the things we've talked about a bit before on the CSM is to have this theory of change. Like, so you understand like the sort of, the analysis and the mainstreaming, the awareness raising, but how does that then relate to the sustainability and the actual impact? And I think that's something that we're still struggling a bit in Somalia. How do you relate all these things together? Because you didn't mention enough, I thought, and maybe I missed it, the sort of relationship with the UN country team, because obviously you are going to have this big funding gap happening, as we all are, on peacekeeping meetings. So how do you actually sustain that, right? So what's the sustainability piece, and how do you bring that into the country team? But equally, how do you bring in climate finance and the adaptation piece, and what is it around some of these big loss and damage adaptation pieces, and how do you make sure that links to where you are analysing in terms of the hotspots? So the coordination piece around, you know, the political input that Hiroko you're doing, and how that works, but also equally with the resources, because actually what we're recognizing is that peace building, like you said, is also a resource question, and specifically the state, often community members and state and things will make things last if there is resources, and that often is only in project funding. And so how do you relate the political piece? So what we've also struggled with, and it would be good to get your reflections on, is you've got great hotspots, but then what? How do you actually make that happen? And how do you do that with a peacekeeping operation that doesn't actually have the funds for a civil military implementation? So the only opportunity is often project funding. So just get your thoughts on that.
Okay, great questions. I would be interested to ask the same to you, but no. I think maybe on the hotspots. I think it's been really helpful. The hotspots are maybe more general, the flood management dashboard with the early warnings that we included in that one. I think it's been really helpful in informing leadership and decision making. And a very concrete example is this cross-border peace dialogue that we organized in early September. It is a known hotspot for all types of communal violence, but especially climate-related and flooding-related. So based on this mapping as well, if you look at the map, actually the area where the peace dialogue also took place is also one of the most severely affected by security incidents as well. So this hotspot mapping, but then also the early warnings that we got from the civil affairs reports really helped us to then say like, okay, let's really try to put something together, bring the different field offices together, see how they can collaborate with the governor, with the county commissioners, and how this whole dialogue can be put together and organized. And it was pretty, I think, amazing that just in a couple of weeks they managed then to pull it off and to bring everyone on board to implement this. So I think on the climate finance, so within the mission, we're we're trying to tap into some of the existing funds for project development. There is the multi-partner trust fund, and then there is also the peace building fund, under which there are some projects that focus on climate security that we collaborate with, for example, with IOM and UN Women. The multi-partner trust fund project, for example, it's recently approved. It has a very strong climate security element in there as well. It's quite a big project in Unity State that is also heavily flood affected. So that's also something where we as a team then can also play a stronger role in. When talking about like collaboration with the UN country team, the whole setup of the team and having Johnson, the senior climate and security advisor, also being part of UNDP, was also with the purpose to have this direct link with the UN country team and specifically with UNDP, and also then to access some of the climate financing through those platforms. I think that setup can then also allow us to try to mobilize some of the climate funding, but it's definitely something that we should try to do more and be better at it. That's I think definitely something that's a working point for our team to do. On the theory of change, yeah, I mean, how do you relate all these elements? I think oftentimes they. So we have, for our team, we have a bit of a theory of change to understand, to look at the risks, and then also how it links with the responses, and how these responses then can also be effective and have a certain impact. I think we should also just a point on this, not underestimate the process of all this. Instead of, I mean, with the theory of change, you're always looking at a process very much focusing on what is out there at the end of the line, what is the exact the effectiveness or the impact. But and this is something that you can relate to many of the activities that we do. But just engaging our colleagues and different organizations and government into what we are trying to do already makes them think about climate change, makes them think about the security risks related to this, and so on. So even though some of the activities may not have like a very clear impact directly, just the whole process towards working something can really help to get the ball rolling and to start some other things as well. So.
Hi, Nazanin Mashiri, International Crisis Group, Senior Analyst. So really interesting what you said at the beginning about the vagueness of the mandate language. Obviously, you know, from various people's perspectives, looking at the UN Security Council and the importance of having climate language in mandates. Interesting that you mentioned it that way. Because there are some who are advocating for stronger sort of climate language in some resolutions. But it would be great for you to expand on, you know, why having this vagueness has given you an opportunity to actually kind of go beyond the mandate. And second question is, obviously from, you know, crisis group's perspective and the way that we look at South Sudan, obviously one of the key dangers, as you know, the country faces, is one of internal implosion, which is related to chaotic elite politics, and also the war in Sudan. How do you factor those political issues into your work on a daily basis? Thanks.
Thanks for that question. So related to the mandates, and I'm talking very much as someone just based in the mission, not at UNHQ, and not very closely involved in any of the Security Council dynamics. I think the language in the mandate is really vague. You could say that it's also in a way quite limited, focusing on understanding the risks and reporting on risk assessments and so on. But for us in the mission, the way the mandate is translated by the mission leadership is really our guidance on how we then implement the mandate. And so if you look at the SRSG strategic vision, multi-year vision coming up, you will notice that climate security is much more prominent in that vision as compared to how it is covered in the mandate. And similarly, in some of the mission policies, but also just what you get from the mission leadership, is that climate security in general is very much supported by the senior mission leadership. It's seen as a very important priority for the mission and part of the mandate that is covering many different elements of the mandated tasks of the mission. Yeah, I think from my perspective, that is really the main guidance on how we then implement it in our work. On elite politics in South Sudan and the effects of the Sudanese crisis, let me start with the last one. It's a bit easier. Yes, of course. I mean, the crisis in Sudan is heavily affecting, especially like the economic situation and humanitarian situation in South Sudan. So it's definitely a very big concern, especially when we see a lot of South Sudanese returnees coming back into South Sudan, especially also when we see a lot of Sudanese refugees entering into South Sudan. There's a lot of sensitivities, especially around returnees. And for example, the peace dialogues that we did with FAO on land disputes was also focusing specifically on returnees who come back to their country after many years, try to claim some of the lands that they have lost. And then there is, on top of this, also then the flooding or other climate impacts as well. So it's definitely something that we feel in our everyday work on working on climate security, especially now with this flooding season as well. On elite politics, yes, of course, many of the drivers of conflict in South Sudan are highly dependent on national political dynamics and elite capture and so on. So this is an element that you can see in many of the security dynamics that take place in the country. It's something that we need to take into account, of course, need to be sensitive about, but that doesn't mean that it's something that is separate from some of the climate security dynamics that are going on. So it's just something that I think most of the mission components working in South Sudan it's just part of the context as well, and part of the conflict dynamics. So.
Sorry for stealing the floor. I need to pick up my kid from the kita. Challenges of working moms. But anyway, as the only Sudanese / previous South Sudanese, because we were one country until 2011, I think it is important to also highlight that I wish if there was actual South Sudanese in the room talking about their own problem. I think ownership, especially when it comes to climate change, peace and security, is still missing very much. And this is something not only in this room, but in other rooms, people talking about other people's problem without them being there. And I think it's also translate a lot of why we are not making the actual progress that we want to make, because although there is a lot of tries to make it a bottom-up approach, is still not there. Well, I left Sudan after the war, so 6 weeks after April 15th. And before that, as a person who was working on climate change, peace and security for 8 years now, we had a lot of attempts and tries to talk to UNMISS, which is the peacekeeping mission in Darfur, before even the separation of South Sudan. Of course, now a lot of people complaining about having a vague mandate, but imagine our problems when there was no mandate in the first place. And it was, for me, it was quite funny because actually the first formal mention of climate change, peace and security was on Darfur itself when the previous Secretary General, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, said that the war in Darfur is the first climate-induced war in the new history, and then the mission was designed blindly on climate change in general. So I'd rather work with a vague mandate than not mandate in the first place, but I still think that we're not making the most of it. And this is not only in the peacekeeping mission in South Sudan, but also in the political mission under Chapter 6 that we had in Sudan, the UNITAMS, also dealing with climate change, peace and security was still not there. I think this is for main three reasons. One, there is a huge demand on the international spheres or different meetings and different front lines. For example, the Security Council. I myself briefed the Security Council 3 times already on climate change, peace and security from a youth perspective. But there was more than 16 hearing sessions within the Security Council on climate change, peace and security since 2007 and even before that. Yet it is still not translated, not in the policies, but definitely not in the project-oriented or development-oriented projects that we do in a lot of countries. And as a result, we might have a reporting or an analysis tool, but we don't really have a prevention process. And then we all learned in school that prevention is better than cure, yet we all wait for the catastrophe to happen and then we react to it. And unfortunately, this is for one simple reason, that it's easier to draw compassion for humanitarian than to draw resources for prevention of a catastrophe from happening. This is not only in South Sudan. I know that the session is about South Sudan now, but even in Sudan, we have more than 12 million IDPs and refugees since the war started in 15th of April 2023, and 8 million of them are in camps in 4 states in northern and eastern Sudan, which is bigger than Germany in size, and in the last flooding season, all of the camps were flooded. And as a result, UNHCR lost almost $80 million in tents because most of the tents were carried away. A lot of people who had to flee once from the war had to flee again because of the flooding, so they are double vulnerable to whatever happening. And third, of course, waterborne diseases, which is also something that have a different nexus to it, like cholera and many other things. And now the Sudanese government declared cholera, actually. There is also a very important perspective for famine in the situation. So there is a distinguish between famine and between starvation and between malnutrition or food insecurity. So famine is normally used when it's is a climate induced, but then starvation is used when it's a conflict weapon. And in the case of Sudan and South Sudan, both situations happen. There is a starvation by the fighting troops, wherever it was, in Sudan and South Sudan, and also there is a famine due to agricultural land flooded and so on. So for me, a peacekeeping mission, if we really want to talk about what we want out of this mission, is basically to protect people, right? And then we have to ask the question, is the mission really protecting people, or it's pretending to protect people, or it's trying to protect people, or it's protecting the international policies of UN or different international world in the country that the peacekeeping mission is in? Sorry to take long, but just to get it short, according to the experience we had with UNAMID, they were not protecting people. They did more damage to the environment than better. They had zero mandate on environmental problems, although everyone acknowledged that the problem and the main cause of war in Darfur was actually environmental and climate change driven. And in South Sudan, I cannot say, because the mission is not finished yet, but I cannot even also have a full understanding, and I'm not, of course, targeting you or the mission. I'm just talking about the structure in general. Is the mission going to actually fulfill what we want from it, which is basically protecting the people? This is my very broad question. Thank you.
Thank you for the very critical comments, and I think especially on the first point that you mentioned on representation, I think it's a very valid point as well, especially on these type of platforms. I must say though that in the mission, the civilian staff are majority national. All the work that we do and the work that I've presented here is also very much driven by our local staff in the field that know these places the best, of course, and any of these peace dialogues would not be possible without, of course, our national staff involved. I fully agree, though, that these national perspectives should be better integrated also in these types of conferences. On the effectiveness of peace operations that you mentioned, yeah, I mean, that's a very big question that I don't think I'm well placed to ask this. There is some people at the conference actually who are part of the effectiveness of peace operations network. They do nothing else than evaluating the effectiveness of peace operations. There is other people that look into some of the existing perceptions towards like how effective and how effective are these missions are being perceived by the country and the people where they are deployed in. So I think those are better placed persons to then give a better assessment on the effectiveness of a mission. But thank you very much for sharing these critical points.
I think we have time for one more question.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all of the comments that we heard during this session. Madeleine O'Donnell with Department of Peace Operations. I wanted to go back to your point on the mandate for Darfur versus the mandate for South Sudan. We've described South Sudan mandate as vague, but it is actually quite clear and explicit on this area of climate security in a way, let's say, that prior missions have not been. I think it needs to be acknowledged. It's very important. And in return, what you see is in the regular 90-day reporting of the Secretary General to the Council on this issue, this is the only report in which you see a dedicated subheading on climate, peace, and security. So I really want to acknowledge it's coming out clearly of the facts on the ground, the reality on the ground, and the priority of the host authorities giving to this issue, and it's reflected in the mandate, and it's reflected back in the reporting. So small steps, but going, I want to say, in a positive direction, and to recognize, and I think very much the spirit of recognizing the high ground, of anticipating what is coming, is precisely the goal that I would think of the footprint of the mission, where it's important to have this preventive presence in order to protect people. Work in progress, much more to be done, but I think very, very much in the spirit and the challenge that you lay before us, and I want to thank you for it. And I want to thank you for the excellent work you're doing. One question for you. When you're engaging with the South Sudanese authorities and civil society and leaders, and you describe that you're doing an engagement on climate security, do they say, what is this abstract nexus, or are South Sudanese counterparts saying to you something different than that? Thank you.
I think in general it's just like, yeah, of course we know this. So it's a topic that is being worded in maybe a different way nowadays, but it's something that is like very, very well known and understood with any level that we engage with, whether it's South Sudanese academia, civil society, national government, state governments, up until the very local communities as well, who live these every day. So of course they know. But no, I think generally the level of expertise also on how climate security programming or risk analysis and so on should look like is very high, and that makes our work really much more interesting as well. And I think what we try to do during these workshops, for example, and what is quite different from what I've been doing in the past with Adelphi on delivering trainings and so on, is that we try really to have the workshops that we organize more as experience sharing and peer learning kind of moments and create these types of things. So we do as much as possible sessions where different organizations or participants can lead and just share it from their specific perception or expertise. And we feel that that is really the most valuable way of designing this capacity building element of our work. And then I think the main challenge then for us is really to talk about risks, but then move into the response side. And this is for us an opportunity, but also a challenge, really looking, what are some of the existing innovative approaches on climate smart agriculture, on flood-based livelihoods, on all these kind of things, and how can it be implemented in a conflict-sensitive way in South Sudan? There's still way too few examples and good practices existing around this, so that's really our task to identify some ways and to bring this into our work. Yes, happy to have a question.
Or maybe I can just come here. Okay, I just wanted to make a short comment. The protection of civilians mandate is very, very important to us. And this is the reason why this climate security unit is under civil affairs, because we are widespread in the country and we are closest to the community. So we take this protection of civilian mandate very, very seriously. And this is the reason why we are not just looking at the hotspot and doing analysis. The community say, well, you are telling us all these problems, but where is the solution? So we have to get to a little bit beyond what we usually do. We have to go and look for the solution. Now, the peacekeeping is, our nature is not to, we don't do the project, we don't introduce normally the solution, especially in the sense of something like it costs a lot of money to do things. This is the reason why that we tap into we do it integrated manner, that nowadays that we don't just work in silo, that we work together with the UN country team. And then, as I mentioned earlier in the session, today's session, that we have different expertise that we can actually chip in. For us, for the peacekeeping, widespread logistics, widespread human resources within the country is an asset. And then we were basically saying that please use us the way you want to advance the climate security so we can protect people better. And I think the mission to consciously put in a climate security unit under civil affairs is the sign or their commitment to actually seriously tackle this issue. So I just wanted to let you know that this is something that is not a joke at all. We take it very seriously and looking forward to your support also. Thank you.
I know we have to close, but I'm just only going to take 10 seconds, only to pitch. We just did, so I'm Wendy McClinchy with the Center for Civilians in Conflict, and we've actually just put out a publication quite recently that profiles the incredible work that Lucas and Johnson and the whole team in UNMISS has been doing in this space in quite a lot of detail. We had 200 interviews, and we really looked at this connection between climate security aspect of the mandate and protection of civilians. So if you're interested in learning more about it, it really is just a nice opportunity to highlight the good work in some detail. And thanks so much for the presentation today.
Thank you, Wendy. I included your research also in a list of some of the resources that I wanted to share. So there's a slide on the presentation. So if you want the presentation, I can definitely share it later on.
Yes, so we're over time and we want to respect. So we managed to moderate NORCAP out of this session, which is fine by us. No need for self-promotion. Just want to mention NORCAP is a large provider of expertise. I just checked our dashboard. So far this year, we did 500 assignments to 50 partner organizations in 70 countries. And I just want to emphasize that Lucas is hopefully the beginning of a much larger engagement within climate, peace and security. I'm looking at you, climate security mechanism representative. And Lucas and I will stay behind, and please feel free to approach us and reach out to us by email or LinkedIn. And thank you so much for coming.